silent so that we don't interrupt the talk tonight. And once again, just welcome and thank you for taking the time out of your busy evenings to join us on this really pertinent topic. In alignment with our Kindness and Anti-Bullying Week this week at Generation Schools, we welcome tonight Dr. Serahni Symington, who will be addressing the topic of bullying. Dr. Serahni is a specialist in family counselling and child and adolescent intervention. We're grateful to have you with us here tonight, visiting again. I know you work a lot with some of our campuses. You've done a previous parent webinar, which was so valuable for our community. And just our approach again this year from the wellness team is that we like to broaden the scope, and we like to address our community at large, just to enable us to get empowered as a community as we raise our children together. The notion that it takes a village to raise a child is what we stand by. And so tonight is really just about empowering us all as educators and as parents so that we can stand united and empowered with topics such as this. So tonight we're going to be covering a few things. Dr. Serahni is going to be talking to us about what bullying is, the different types of bullying, the impact bullying has, and then how to intervene as parents and educators, because a lot of the time we actually don't know how to address this. So again, welcome. Looking forward to a beautiful, informative evening. And yeah, hope you've all got something nice and warm to drink while we go through this learning. So take it away.
Thank you so much. Just to check if my sound is okay and you can hear me 100%. Thank you, Sandra. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. Let's see if I can still do this. Okay. So we're going to just share content. No, it doesn't want to do this. Sorry, don't know why it's not opening up. You can't see my PowerPoint at the moment.
Not at the moment. So there's the, have you got the share? Share?
Yeah. I'm clicking on the share and it's asking me to click on the window, which I'm doing, but it's not
coming up.
Accepting it.
Give you a moment just to find it. No problem. We're still welcoming people in to join.
Okay, let me just try again. No, it's showing me Sandra doesn't want me to open. Security and privacy, you need permission to share your screen. Can you give me permission? No, it's asking for permission. I'm just going to retry. Apologies, I got kicked off. All right, let me try again. There we go. Okay, wonderful. All right, I hope you can all see the slides. Yes, let's get into it. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think this is a topic that's really close to my heart. I think a lot of kids struggle with this in life. And we often don't realize the impact and the long-term effects it can have when a child's being bullied, and especially in severe cases of bullying throughout their life. And also that anti-bullying campaigns are life skills that we teach kids. Often kids don't realize whether they're being mean or whether they're being rude or whether they're bullying someone. And often when I sit in my counseling practice and kids come and visit me because they're either the bully or the victim of the bully, they often didn't realize what was happening until it was really severe. And so, the best way to work with bullying is in terms of prevention. And how do we prevent? Through education and understanding. So I'm hoping tonight we get a sense of what bullying is and also what it isn't, and then that it helps us as a community to upskill our kids also in terms of handling bullying in life. So what is bullying? I think sometimes kids often use the term bullying too easily. So they would say, my friend was being mean, they're bullying me, or they didn't give me the ball today, they were bullying me. So often we find that kids talk...
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Sorry, your screen isn't showing. Yeah, I can just see a picture of myself.
That's really strange.
Yeah, can't see the slides. So
Okay,
it could be a different... We're seeing you now.
What are you seeing
now?
now?
There we go. I've got it. What is bullying? Go for it.
Okay. Thank you, Sandra. Ooh, technology, gotta love it. All right. So what is bullying? This is what we need to figure out tonight. So what we're going to talk about is defining bullying so that we know when it is bullying and when it isn't, where it happens, what traits are usually involved, whether it's the bullying or the person being bullied. What about age and the relevance of age, the types of bullying, and of course the impact, and then what we can do as parents. So some of the definitions of bullying, as we read through definitions, we often find patterns and aspects that repeat. So in the repetition, we know that this thing is our definition. So if we just look at those three, the first one says a power differential, sustained, repetitive, aggressive, harmful. We hear those words. And then the second one says when one or more children repeatedly expose another child to negative actions. So already we're seeing the pattern of repetitive. It's a repeating activity. It's not something that happened once. It's not something that happens once this year and in 3 years there was another incident. It's repetitive. And the negative, harmful actions, right? So repetitive fixation on someone that's harmful and negative. All right, so there's a pattern of behavior. We see the word pattern there as well. Repeated aggression. So if we had to summarize it into two key components of what bullying is, we know there's repeated harmful acts. It happens almost every day. And it's because of an imbalance of power. Someone has to have power over the other. Right, so those two are the two key components to be able to define bullying. So when we know this is the definition and our children come and talk to us about their day, if the same name comes up, this child did this to me, and then 2 days later, this same child did this to me, 2 days later, this same child did. As soon as there's repeated, intended, harmful action from one specific child, that can be construed as bullying, right? If a child and their friend have been friends for a long time and they come home one day and say, this person has been mean to me today and took my sandwich. It's not necessarily bullying. It might just be that there was normal social conflict. Peers have conflict. Friends fight. That's normal. It's just when that fight becomes repetitive, and if the fight, the trigger behind the fight is feeling powerful. Very important to understand the difference between bullying and when kids are mean and when kids are being rude. So just for the sake of that topic, I just want to give some definitions of rude and mean also. So when we talk about someone being rude, it's a general term. We often say, oh, that's rude, or this person is rude. But what does it mean to be rude? Rude means to be inadvertently saying or doing something that hurts someone else. So I say something with the purpose of being hurtful. It's rude, right? Mean is purposely saying or doing something to hurt someone once or maybe twice. Okay, so rude is saying something that's hurtful. Maybe it's not often, and maybe it's not something that I go about thinking that I'm going to be rude. It's like some of those people that say, I'm not rude, I'm just direct. saying something without necessarily wanting to be mean, but it's still hurtful, versus mean, it's a purposeful saying and doing something to hurt someone. I'm mean to you, but it happens once or twice maybe. Bullying is that intentionality in terms of aggressive, hurtful behavior that repeats and repeats and repeats with the imbalance of power. So we see the difference there. We see there's a difference between being rude, mean, and bullying. And so when kids experience social conflicts and when they experience bullying, there's a different set of skills that they need. If they're being bullied, we need to teach them a certain set of skills. If a friend is being rude or mean, it's another set of skills. So it's very important to define what it is and what it isn't.
You're on mute.
I promise I didn't press anything. I don't know why I'm muted now. So let's go from here. Places where bullying mostly occurs in social systems, because where else would it occur? Bullying occurs between people. And so when people are together, bullying is most likely to occur. When a person is isolated, of course, it cannot happen. And where do children find themselves for most of the day? At school. And often I find that role players feel that schools are breeding ground for bullying, and maybe the school's culture is wrong or the school's going about it the wrong way. But sometimes indirectly, it's not the school's fault, it's the social climate's fault. So in a sense, if this child is at school for most of their day and then at home, of course it's going to happen at school because that's where the social system is. So 2/3 of the time bullying does happen at school because that's where the child has more exposure to the other and to peers. 1/3 of the time it happens after school, but still on the school ground for most of the time. 74% of the time it happens on the playground. Okay, so not in the classroom, because on the playground, there's a lot of aspects and activity going on. Kids are running around, this one's swinging, that one is running, those ones are play fighting, these ones are doing this and this and that. So often it's difficult from a spectator's point of view to really see bullying at face value because there's so much going on a school ground. So I was teaching for 8 years, and I know that teachers have to do what we call break duty, where we walk around the quads and the fields, and teachers have their areas, and you had to try and see whether or not kids were getting along or whether bullying was happening. But it's really quite an overwhelming space to see bullying happening in terms of verbal bullying and exclusion. So those two things you can't often see. The easy bullying to spot is the physical bullying, because obviously if a child's hitting another child, that's blatant. You can see it immediately and you can put a stop to it. But some of the types of bullying we cannot see with the eye. If you're close enough to hear some of it, of course, but not always in terms of view. So that's the difficulty about bullying at school. So a lot of parents ask me, okay, but then if bullying happens at school, when does it start? How do I start equipping my child? So true bullying only starts at age 7 or 8, when kids start understanding the meaning of power. Now, what is important to understand here is that children under the age of 7 and 8 often don't have intention of being hurtful. We often find that kids' behavior is not a result of being naughty. I don't like that word. I hate that word. Children being naughty. It's more a case of children trying to please others. So if a child lies, for example, some of the research shows us that children can't really lie under the age of 7 or 8. They please. So if you ask them, have you brushed your teeth? They don't lie to be deceitful. They lie to please you because they know what you want to hear. And so it's the same as the sense of bullying. It only starts at 7 and 8 because of that inability to really be able to lie because they want to please. The other interesting part of childhood development is that the brain has different states of development. And I often talk about this, and those of you who've been in my talks might hear this as a repetition, but I think it's important. So in emotional spaces, we have 3 brain states: survival brain, emotional brain, and thinking brain. And they develop at different stages in childhood. So the 0 to 3-year-olds, they're in that survival state most of the time. They just want to know that they're being fed, that they're safe, that they have a bed to sleep in, and that adults are taking care of me. Most of the time, They just want to know that they're safe and cared for. That's the survival state between 0 and 3. Then they go up to 3 to 5 years old. They go into the emotional brain. Now, that's when we get the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds that we often find. Some people talk about the terrible 2s and that kids at 2 years old, have a lot of tantrums. But often parents realize my 4-year-olds are more emotionally dysregulated than the 2-year-old. And it's because they move into that emotional brain space. So between 3 and 5-year-old is emotional brain. And that's the brain that doesn't do well with no, and it doesn't do well with not getting my way. As soon as I hear no, and as soon as I'm not getting my way, I go into survival state. I have a fallback. I slip back into survival. All right, so survival and emotional. If emotional doesn't get its way, it slips back into survival. What are the kids' tools in survival and emotional state? Their natural tools. In emotional states, we usually have a lot of verbalizing. Nobody likes me. Everybody's against me. And they have a lot of, I always call it the complaining stage. And if they go into survival stage, what is their tool there? Fight, flight, freeze. So those are the 3 things that they do if they're in that survival state. And that's where we see the tantrums, because tantrums is actually a fight mode. So if we know that the child is developing 0 to 3 survival, 3 to 5 emotional, what happens then at 6 years old, just before this understanding the meaning? The prefrontal cortex starts to develop. So kids' brains literally start to develop their thinking brain when they go to school. And at the same time that they're going to school, they start comparing themselves to the other, to their friends, to their peers. So two massive things happen at the age of 7. They can start problem solving, thinking, being logical in their thinking brain. Plus, having that logic now spills over into, how do I compare myself with my peers? So that ruler comes out. How do we measure up in terms of our rulers? And so that's the interesting stage where we start seeing bullying that's really intentional, that we can start working with the kids on understanding why bullying is not an adequate response. All right. So kids at that age start realizing they have control over themselves and they can feel more powerful when they move up the social ladder. So the smarter I am, the more sporty I am, the better I dress, or whatever the case may be, the more attention I receive from my peers. They start putting one and one together because they have their thinking brain. So that's when we have to watch for bullying, and people get involved in schools at that stage. What's also interesting just about the age of bullying, we see flare-ups. So bullying happens throughout the lifespan, from around the age of 7 up until adulthood, where we often see workplace bullying also. But what is interesting is that there are spikes at certain age groups. So if we look at research, the first spike for bullying is around grade 4, grade 5, all right, when they go into that transitional space of child going into the tween stage. And then another spike is at grade 9, when that pre-adolescent goes into full adolescence. So interesting, with transitional periods in their life development, bullying happens because those are the periods in the child's life that they feel insecure the most. Okay, if I'm still grade 2, grade 3, I'm still a child, I'm still happy to play, I'm still happy to have the influence of my parents, I'm still happy to listen to my teacher. Grade 4, 5, they start moving over in terms of identity. And now I'm not this little baby anymore, but I'm also not a teenager yet. So they sit in that insecure state. And that's when bullying happens, because if I don't feel good about myself, I bully so that I can feel better and move up the social ladder. So we see that at that age group. And then again, that happens at grade 9. Same thing. You're the baby in high school, grade 8, grade 9, and now you switch over into being a senior and kind of having yourself sorted out in terms of identity, because now I'm high school, finishing school, thinking about my future, what I'm going to study, etc., etc. So we see those spikes at that time of the development. Okay. Types of bullying. There are different types of bullying. Karen Sullivan identified the first 4 in 2006, but since then, cyberbullying has become probably the biggest problem in research in terms of bullying, because it's become so massive. The first 4 that we've seen for the last few years is aggressive bullies, passive bullies, relational bullies, and reactive bullies. Now, what's interesting, the aggressive bully is the one we know the best because that's the one we see in the movies and we see on TV shows. And that's the one we fear the most because it's physical evidence. So if someone hits me and I have a black eye, there's physical evidence of the bullying. It's aggressive, it's hurtful, it hurts my body. It's not an emotional bullying, it's physical, the aggressive bully. The second type of bully is the passive bully. Now, the passive bully is the one that we find the most. 87% of the time, when we look at bullying on the school ground, it's passive bullying. Now, what does it mean when we say passive bullying? So firstly, it's something that we often cannot detect when someone is being hurtful towards someone else, whether it's through verbal slurs, whether it's through name calling, whether it's through exclusion, whether it's through teasing and taunting from afar. Sometimes kids. I had a girl once that said, but Serahni, it's the way they look at me. They always look at me and then whisper. They always look at me and then whisper. So it's not an aggressive coming over and being physical with someone. It's more that gossiping, standing back, not participating actively in the bullying. Passive bullying also includes when there are standers by. So say, for example, there is an aggressive bully. They are being mean and hurtful, but there are friends around the bully that are not stopping the activity. Those are also considered as passive bullying because although they are not doing the bullying, they are intimidating. So they're standing around this aggressive bully. They're part of his social group. They're looking at the bullying and kind of not stepping in, which means they kind of accept the bullying behavior, and that makes them bullies by association. So aggressive bully is the one we see often. The passive bully is the bystander or the bully that bullies from afar and doesn't necessarily have to be hurtful or even verbal in their approach. The third bully is relational bullies. Now, this we often see with our girls when they exclude people from friendships or they don't allow them into inner circles because of social status. So maybe because of the way they look or the way they speak or their culture, certain kids aren't allowed in certain circles. All right, so that's the relational bully. Reactive bullies are really interesting, and I work with this quite often. A reactive bully is someone who was a victim of bullying for so long that they have become bullies themselves. For so long, they've been taunted and tainted and victimized and pushed to the limit that they then respond and start reacting and bullying themselves to feel better about themselves. So that's the reactive bully. And then, of course, the fifth one, the cyber bully, is the one we're seeing a lot in South Africa at the moment. Our kids are very tech savvy. They're on cell phones, they're on iPads, they're on Xboxes and PlayStations and Nintendos and all of these devices. And so on the chat platforms and on the social media platforms, we find that kids are bullying excessively. 1 in 5 South African teenagers have experienced cyberbullying firsthand, and 84% say that they know someone. These are very high statistics. So 1 in 5, I mean, if you just think of a classroom of 20 kids, that means 4 of the kids in that classroom is being bullied in every class in your school. And that's quite a high statistic. So South Africa is, I think we're 4th in the world in terms of our cyberbullying statistics. So it's quite bad in this country. And this was done by a global survey recently. This is where my concern peaks. So we've said bullying is repeated, it's intentional, it's harmful, it's something that happens over and over and over. A child is exposed over and over and over to the bullying, and it can happen in a variety of ways. It can happen as passive bullies, aggressive bullies, reactive bullies. It can happen online on cyberbullying platforms, and there's even different ways of bullying. I mean, I can continue just in terms of name calling, socially excluding. It can be in terms of photo manipulation, hoax phone calls. There's so many different ways that someone bullies, but the main definition is that I'm doing something to you that hurts you either emotionally or physically. And what that does is that repeated harm creates stress responses in my brain. So my brain has toxic stress that's there almost all of the time. When you think about cyberbullying, what makes cyberbullying so bad for me is that a child cannot escape it. It's not like you've been bullied at school, you close the school gate, you go home and you have the love of your family, you care of your family and you're safe at home and the bully can't get you. With cyberbullying, it's with you all the time, every time you open your phone. It's not something you can escape. So if we think about that toxic stress state that the brain is in all the time, being anxious, worried, scared, feeling low self-esteem because why are the bullies bullying me? You can imagine that being in that fight, flight, and freeze response all day, has the stress hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is flooding their brain the whole day. So they had a heightened stress response. So their brain actually starts getting used to this high cortisol level and starts forming certain neural pathways with regards to stress, that they become either anxious, depressed, and in extreme cases that we've seen in the media, there's even suicide and suicidal ideation. So it can get bad. I'm not saying that every child that is bullied gets anxiety, depression, or suicidal ideation. But we can imagine a child that's being bullied over a period of time, every day for a year or 2 or 3, which often happens, can get to this extreme. All right, so that's worst case scenario, which is quite bad. The other behavioral concerns that we see in practice is often the first time I realize bullying is involved is when a child has school refusal. They're not wanting to go to school. They're scared to go to school. They get anxious Sunday nights already because Monday morning is school, or they might in the morning ask you, is it school today? Is it school today? Do I have to go? It's a fight to get them out of the house. They're very deflective. They'll do anything before they get dressed. They'll have 3 different types of cereal instead of one, kind of slur the time to get to school. A lot of school refusal often translates back to bullying. Not saying that it's exclusively bullying that has the consequence of school refusal. Sometimes other aspects lead to school refusal. But a lot of the time we see school refusal as one of the symptoms of bullying behavior. And of course, if I'm stressed and if I'm in my survival state, I'm out of thinking brain. I cannot think and concentrate if I'm stressing about what will happen at break, what's going to happen after school. If I'm sitting in the class and the bully is sitting across from me, I cannot concentrate. If my brain is in emotional or in survival states, I cannot be in my thinking brain. And so often we see a drop in marks or drop in academic performance as a result of bullying. The biggest thing we see with bullying is insecurity. So feeling less than the other, feeling less than my peers. I'm not good enough. Why don't people like me? What is wrong with me? And so that's a very lonely and isolated place to be. So often children act the way they feel. So if they're withdrawing socially, not going to gatherings, isolating themselves in their room, not wanting to be between friends, we often find that is a result of bullying as well and something happening at school because of that insane insecurity that it's high. It's really high. It's worrying. And then that leads to, of course, social developmental concerns because a child is not developing in their social skills or in their social environment, which is the job of a child. The job of a child is to be social and to be between peers and learn how to find their voice in the world and their space in the world and their identity. I can only know who I am if I look at myself in the system. I'm the sporty one, or I'm the academic one, or I am a friendly one, I'm the kind one. How do we measure our identity? We measure ourselves in the social context. I'm the kind one means that person might be the rude one, So I'm the kind one in relation to the other. And so with all of these school refusals, academic regression, insecurity, isolating, children don't have the ground, or they don't have the playground to be able to develop those social skills that they so desperately need in the adult world. And like I said, the massive amount of stress that's in a child's brain and in their body affects them. So often we see that the stress translates into migraines, headaches, tummy aches, and a lot of psychosomatic symptoms in their body. Often we see the stress impacting their health. Even with stuff like chronic diseases, there's been tied between stress and disease. So this is a really big conversation in terms of being mindful of the effect that long-term bullying can have. And Hindura Pachan wrote an article which I often quote. I know it's already 13 years ago, but they found that bullying causes not only just hurt feelings. It's not just an emotional, oh, I feel sad. The consequences can permanently damage the brain neurology in terms of coping skills. If I'm always stressed and I'm always in a stress response and my coping skill is to isolate, and I repeat that over and over and over, that becomes my autopilot. That becomes the way I do life. And that's not what we want for our kids. So toxic stress has the potential to change your child's brain chemistry, brain anatomy, and even gene expression. Toxic stress weakens the architecture of the developing brain, which can lead to problems in learning, behavior, their physical wellness, and their mental health. And so this is why this is such a big talk. I hope you're still with me. So I don't only want to preach all the bad stuff. I'm obviously going to give you tools and go into what does the child then need. And this is where we get into the hierarchy of needs. If we know that bullying happens and we know what bullying is and we know what bullying does to a child, how do we combat that in terms of giving the child what they need so that that doesn't happen? And Maslow wrote so many years ago, and I think often we glance at Maslow and think, oh, this is such an old theory. Is it still even relevant in today's society? And, you know, sometimes we read Maslow as, yes, we have to know this, but, you know, is it really as powerful? And I think it is, because what Maslow wrote a few years ago already, he said that all human beings want to be in a state where we feel happy and that we feel we're good. We've got this, we've got life, we're doing well at it, we're successful, and that's the state of self-actualization. That's the blue block. That's the block that says, I've arrived, I feel good about myself, I feel good about my life, I'm happy. But to get there, we have all these building blocks underneath it. It's not just something that happens, we build towards it. And so if we start from the bottom to go up to that self-actualization, we need to know what the basics are. So right at the bottom, easy, survival state type things. We just have to have what we need in terms of survive. Air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing. If we have those things, our physiological needs are met. Most of our kids are in privileged positions that they do have that sense of having food when I'm hungry and having clothes to wear and sleeping enough. So that's a very big tick. That's an easy tick, but just be mindful of that word sleep. Okay, if our children are not sleeping appropriately, that also can contribute to mental health, and it can also contribute to mood, right? So they need to sleep. Children need to sleep proper sleep routines, and that means that cell phone can't go to their room and be involved in their sleep routine. So if we say, okay, that's the easy one, we give them food, we make sure they feel safe, and we give them clothing, okay, that's a tick box, it's easy. The next one says safety. Now, where does bullying play into this? When a child's being bullied, they won't feel safe. And often we find that when a child is with their friends and they are attention seeking, or they are doing things that they won't necessarily do, that's against their own morals, it's something that we often say, this is not my child. It means that in that relationship with their friend, they're not feeling safe because they need to pretend or change or be something else for the friend to be accepted. So they're not emotionally feeling safe. So although we at home can often contribute to safety through having alarm systems and physical safety measures and having burglar bars and making sure that they know what happens next and providing them with all the resources for safety, when they go to school and they are in relationships that aren't feeling safe, that's when we see that effect of the bullying. All right, but let's pretend, okay, they're feeling safe, they're feeling good. The next one is love and belonging. We cannot get to self-actualization, we cannot get to identity and self-esteem if they're not feeling accepted. If their peer group is excluding them, as with bullying, not allowing them in, not making them feel valued, not making them feel acknowledged, not making them feel part of, then all that building blocks just falls down and we won't get to self-actualization. So the two aspects that I really want you to focus on in terms of understanding the impact of bullying is that the child needs to feel safe and they have to feel love and belonging. Why is it so important? Why is that love and belonging, that social, so important? Because social support has been shown to be highly correlated with the release of a hormone called oxytocin. This is a brain's chemical that creates calm, especially under stress. So if we're talking about stress and how bullying can create toxic stress and continuous stress for a child, what is the medicine for that? Connection. Connection, social support. And so often with bullying, the one thing that we know stops bullying is when the bully has a good social support system. Mom and dad believe me, my teachers help me, and my real friends support me. If a child has that social support, they combat bullying and bounce back quite quickly. So very important in the bullying conversation is that aspect of having social support systems, right? And here we see it again, just as a kind of a summary. That survival state's asking, am I safe? That's the job of the survival brain. As soon as I feel safe, I can go into emotional state. That emotional state can only move along when I feel that I'm attached to my social system, I'm attached to my family system, I'm attached to my school system. I feel loved, belonging, and acceptance. Once a child feels those things, they can go into self-regulation and thinking brain. And what happens in the thinking brain is a child can apply what we teach them. Often when we say to a child things like, if the bully walks up to you, remember to stop, talk, and walk away. You know, there's this beautiful models that we teach children. Stop the bully, say, stop, I don't like what you're saying. Tell them what you're feeling. This isn't fair, I don't like it. And walk away. Stop, talk, walk. That's what we teach the kids, right? Beautiful. But it won't happen if the child is not in thinking brain. Because in thinking brain, they can self-regulate. In thinking brain, they can problem solve. So if a child is being bullied, but they're very secure in their support system, they're very secure in the school system, they do have good friends, then they have the ability to work with the bully in that thinking state. And that's what we want. That's what we want to teach them. So here we go with the good news. How can we intervene? All right, so a few things to take into consideration. The first thing is the phase and the personality of the child. So if a child is still fairly young, we need to teach skills that are age appropriate. We can't teach a 4 or 5-year-old from stop, talk, and walk because they can't express themselves well yet. But we can maybe do it for 10-year-old, 12-year-old. And then a 15-year-old, you can't do that anymore because they would see it as being like a little bit childish show because they need to have a little bit more depth. So the phase of the child is important, the age. Personality-wise, it's different for an introvert being bullied than for an extrovert being bullied. An extrovert will go to their social support systems. An extrovert will talk about it. An extrovert will go to their parents. The introvert might internalize and they might overgeneralize, they might overthink, they might try and make sense of it first by themselves, absorb and process. And you might only hear of the bullying 3, 4, 5 days later or 2 years later. So the personality of the child is also important to understand how they deal with bullying. Emotional intelligence. So we teach children how they feel. Sometimes a child doesn't even realize they're bullying or that they're being bullied. And so sometimes when we have emotional moments, such as having calm spaces or having faces on the fridge where they have happy, sad, mad, and glad, especially for the littlies, and saying, what did you feel today? Mommy, I felt this one. Oh, that's a sad face. What made you feel sad? When the friend took my Sami. I had an incident with one of the people that I'm seeing that said the boy said to her, Mommy, the boy's taking my food. And she thought, okay, so maybe he's hungry, share your food. He said, no, Every day he takes my lunchbox and he eats it even though I tell him not to. And by the time the mom kind of got wind of this and the boy started talking about it, this had been going on for a while, where the boy was actually coming to his suitcase, ripping out his lunchbox, eating all his food and then throwing it on the floor. And so through feeling faces and asking him about his day and what he was feeling, that kind of came out. Also, in terms of breathing exercises and mindfulness activities, helping to create calm for those stress, especially the kids who are being bullied, it's very important to teach them calming skills for their toxic stress, not to overtake their brains and bodies. So that's an emotional response to the bullying. Another emotional response is building their sense of self and strengthening the self. In other words, the identity. If a child feels that self-actualizing behavior and I feel good about myself and confident, often bullies don't bully them because they can see there's been a shift in the child. If I bully the child, will they respond to my bullying? If yes, I continue. If no, I'll stop. So often bullying stops when the child shows confidence and strengthening of the self, because then that power and control differential has run out. I don't have power over the person anymore. So what do we do in counseling and as parents? We teach emotional skills, we teach alternatives, and we get practical. If your child is experiencing bullying, I really highly recommend that you go to counseling for the child to just alleviate some of the trauma and the stress that the child has undergone through the bullying time, and also for these skills to be taught. We can teach the children resilience, we can teach alternatives, we can show them safety measures, because sometimes bullying is hard to stop in the system. If kids are bullying in that permissive way, that's very hard for the teacher to detect. Sometimes it's hard to stop the actual bullying from happening in certain areas. It really is hard. And often parents feel and tell me, I feel like the school doesn't believe us. They don't believe that it's going on. But if my child says it's happening and your child says it's not happening and there's no evidence, proof, cameras or whatever around, it's a really, really hard thing to manage. And once a child is then in counseling, two things can happen. One, we can build resilience and coping skills for the child being bullied and teach them methods of, trying to combat the bullying, but also sometimes the counselor then gets involved with the school and can help the school to determine what's happening, what's going on, because the counsellor has more insight because they spend so much time with the child understanding the incidents. And then the counsellor can also help the school or the teacher to say, it's happening at this time of the day, can you position yourself there, and give practical advice for how to combat the bullying in that specific situation. Every bully situation is different, and that makes it difficult to work with. Also, there's a sense of determining whether a child has perceived fear versus real fear. We started off this journey together tonight saying to each other, sometimes kids are being mean, sometimes it's social conflict, sometimes it's being rude. And we just have to determine whether there's perceived bullying or whether it's real bullying to know how to address it. I said that to you right at the beginning. If a child is struggling with social relationships, we teach social skills. If bullying is happening, we need to have intervention. So is it perceived or is it real? And then the social systems, and I think this is what Generations is doing at the moment, is that value-based intervention. What does it mean to be kind? What does it mean to be tolerant? What does it mean to be a good friend? What does it mean to be nice, even though we're different? If our kids get exposed to that type of value-based education, we do see bullying numbers lessen. In schools with a high moral ethic, with, we had a school that had, it was so cool, they called it a code of honor. And the boys they had this code of honor badges, and it was all about the collective and, this is the way our school does things, and we take care of one another, and, we all in this together, we have family. You would see the bullying numbers drop because of that inclusion, love and belonging, and that value-based understanding of the other instead of judgment or social statuses and class statuses, etc. So that value-based interventions in school works amazingly. And it's not only the teaching staff, it's all the role play. So when the coaches are involved and when the aftercare is involved and when, everybody at the school, even, the receptionist that, speaks to kindness and being nice, if everybody speaks the same language, we see that the social system normalizes the good responses as opposed to the bullying responses. If bullying is really, really very bad, there can be mediation suggested where the teachers and the parents get together and try and resolve the conflict in extreme cases where none of the above helps to stop the bullying. Another thing that we've did at one school is with passive bullying, it's difficult to detect what's going on in the playground. So what we did at one school is we had anonymous surveys, but it was older kids, around 10 to 15 years old. And we sent out surveys in the classroom asking them certain questions about bullying at school that they could, as a qualitative questionnaire, tick certain boxes. And after doing some of the surveys, we could see that verbal bullying was a big problem under the girls. And then online gaming bullying was a big problem under the boys. And so the school could really hone in on those two aspects. Instead of addressing bullying as a whole, they could really zone in to the problem areas that the kids themselves identified in anonymous surveys. So that was also quite a helpful tool. I'm on my very last slide. So parents, this is for you. What can you do at home? All right. The one that I've underlined at the top is very important. Listen to your children. The biggest complaints I get from children who've been bullied is that no one believes me and no one listens. Everyone just wants to solve the problem. So if I tell someone, this is what happens today, the first response is, I'm going to find a teacher and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And actually all I need is for someone to just listen. Listen to me. And that's that question around, do we provide comfort or do we just jump into solution mode? Sometimes kids need comfort first, process, get the social support so that the oxytocin can level out that cortisol, so that the connection can combat the survival, because then I can go into thinking state and problem solve with you, okay? The best way to address bullying is to stop it before it starts, which I think is great with this platform tonight where we're talking about bullying. That's the first way that we stop bullying, is to be aware of it, so that we do psychoeducation and understand what bullying is, isn't, and the effects of it. Like I said, seek counseling. I think that's very, 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 very important. Teach your children to report bullying safely, but immediately. So if they are experiencing bullying, who is someone that they trust that they can talk to at school? If they're fearful of talking to the teacher because a friend might hear or they might be seen as a tattletale, talk to your parents. So teach them what they can do when they feel that they're being bullied. Also, asking open-ended questions is often a good way of finding out what happens. That's what I do in session. Tell me about this. Can you maybe just give me the picture of what happened in that moment? Big question, open-ended, so that they can talk and you can listen to their language. What are they saying? What are they not saying? Let your children know that you support them. Like we say, remember that oxytocin, social support, is the biggest anti-bullying technique that I can give you. Reassure the children who are being bullied that bullying is not their fault. Often they go into that insecurity of, I'm being bullied because I'm so weird. I'm being bullied because I'm so tall. I'm being bullied because I'm not that good at sport. So they internalize and they find fault with themselves. Okay. If someone is exhibiting bully behavior, let the person talk about his or her experiences and offer support. I sometimes do talks at school, and what was so powerful, I did a talk at a high school recently, and after the talk, someone came up to me, one of the kids, a high school kid, and he said to me, I think I'm bullying, and I know why. And he had some trauma at home as well, but I allowed him in a non-judgmental way just to talk to me about it, talk me through it. What's been happening? Why do you say you think you've been bullying? What is happening? Where do you think it stems from? And so in that non-judgmental way, just listening to him actually brought a lot of things up. You could get him into counseling, and the bullying obviously stopped because he got the positive support that he needed. Does it mean the bullying is okay? No. No, it's not okay that he bullies. It's absolutely not okay. But if we help him, then the bullying can stop. Okay, be a positive role model. Take leadership position when we prevent bullying by implementing bullying conversations, showing support. Teachers can do consequences in the classroom. I asked my daughter the other day, she's 10 years old, I said to her, do you have bullies at school? She said, no, Mom, my school doesn't tolerate bullying. We are anti-bullying school. Our principal always says that. So in her mind, they've set a consequence, they've set the tone, they've said it's unacceptable, and therefore doesn't happen in her belief. Also, I just think monitoring cell phone and internet use of children, especially our young ones, because a lot of it happens over the cell phones. I always say when a child gets a phone, they also need to get the Bill of Rights for the phone, and knowing that you can do spot checks, it's still your phone, they have access to it. Obviously in high school, that privacy changes. But while we still have influence over them, the same way that you would determine where are they going, who are they going with, who's driving, is it safe, will there be adults? It's the same question that we ask around the cell phone also. And then just talk about bullying. Talk about the assumption. They need to talk about bullying with their parents. They need to talk about bullying with the teachers. If you as a parent are unsure about bullying happening, talk to the teachers at school. Teachers, if you're experiencing bullying, talk to your colleagues, talk to your line managers, tell them that you're seeing this and this and that, and gain some soundboard and some insight from others, because I do believe when we start talking about things, solutions pop up. And so it's very important that we talk through some of those aspects. Okay, I am done with my presentation. I hope that through the conversation you heard some definitions to know what it is, how it happens, when it happens, and how do we prevent this type of behavior to happen, because we are so concerned about that architecture of the brains and the toxic stress that our kids are under because of the repetitive nature of bullying. I thank you for listening. I know it's been a long talk, but I hope that there is something that you can take from it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Loads of information. I know that there is a lot of questions in the chat. I know that we've got about 4 minutes left until the time has run out. What I'd like to invite you to do is obviously in your campuses, we've got our wellness coaches who are all registered counselors and social workers, and they are trained to deal with scenarios such as bullying. Obviously, if you have any concerns, to speak to your educators. Those would be your first port of calls, and then to escalate to head of departments, but we all work collectively. So that if there is anything surfacing for your child, please do reach out. We even work from a head office point of view. There are instances where we all collectively get involved. So I'm going to put my email address into the chat. Just because of time, we're not going to be able to go into questions, unfortunately, but I would like to encourage you that if there's anything pressing, if there's anything that you'd like to raise awareness for, please don't hesitate to either reach out to myself or, like I said, your educators, your head of campus, the wellness coaches. There are a myriad of people that we can reach out to. Okay. Dr. Serahni, are you still there?
I am.
Okay, is that okay, or is there anything like you would like to answer to in the chat that you might just close off the webinar with?
Sorry, I just feel like everything is lagging on my side, but I'm here.
Yeah, I just were you able to look through any of the comments? I think there were quite a few comments that came up. Is there anything like you would like to close on, or are we happy to close webinar?
It's live.
I think some of the comments that are coming up, I think we haven't focused a lot on the bully themselves, and I think a lot of people are commenting on the bully. and that is often reasons why bullies bully, and that is in fact so. So we do see certain aspects of bullies in terms of their own social support systems, in terms of neglect, in terms of attachment, in terms of, like I said, being reactive because of some of their own trauma and their own experiences. So absolutely some bullies bully because of their own life situations and needing support. So that's a very important comment. I think I just want to comment on. Yeah, I think that's all I can see quickly. There's a lot of comments. I can't quickly go through all of them, but yeah, I think if parents can send through to the wellness coaches, they can also contact me if there's anything that I can answer or send back in terms of literature.
Perfect. Once again, thank you all for joining us tonight. Please do reach out. Let's continue the conversation. And I thank you very much for your time and for your wisdom. And we look forward to coming together again just to bring empowerment and upliftment and just skills development amongst the community that raises our children. Okay, wishing you all a beautiful evening. Rest well and see you tomorrow at School for Friday.